are so excited to be here. We are going to read one page each and we'll alternate. How much are you worth, precious boy? How much is the boy worth?
More than the stars and the moon in the sky, more than the sun up above, more than all the incredible things in this world, it is you that I treasure and love.
Fearfully and wonderfully made, valuable just because you're you. Uniquely designed, you are one of a kind. Little boy, do you know that this is true?
Your body and mind, your heart and soul, were all made in his image, made to be whole.
You are worth speaking up for, worth any fight, worth all the cost of choosing what's right, worth sacrifices, worth doing hard things, worth standing beside you, whatever life brings.
Worth more than money or power or gold, worth whatever it takes for your worth to be told.
Worth raising my voice to shout what is true, worth holding you close to say, I love you.
Worth trying again, worth working hard, worth being with you, playing tag in the yard.
Worth standing up tall, worth standing alone, worth bearing the cost for the truth to be known.
How much are you worth, precious boy? How much is a little boy worth? More than the stars and the moon in the sky, more than the sun up above, more than all the incredible things in this world, it is you that I treasure and love.
Your worth doesn't come from being in charge or from money or fame to be won. Your value is found in how you were made, worth everything, even God's Son.
Your worth doesn't change, it can never be lost. It won't melt away like a cold winter frost. No matter what happens, your worth will remain. At the end of the day, it will stay just the same.
God is the strongest. What he says is true. And he's told the world just how much he loves you. He showed your value by giving his life. Showed your worth such a great sacrifice.
How much are you worth, precious boy? How much is a little boy worth? Worth infinitely more than you can imagine, and no one can change what's been spoken by heaven. It was really a privilege to get to write this book. I think our sons struggle with so many of the same identity issues that I struggle with. But oftentimes we don't give them the tools to express that and to be able to ask those questions. And so our prayer with this book is that it gives you the tools to use to communicate to your boys and helps give them a framework for understanding where their value and their identity comes from. And we would love to take questions or just have a good discussion about anything that you want to ask.
One of the things that we, after Rachael wrote the little girl's book, How Much Is the Little Girl Worth, we heard over and over, where's the book for boys? And one of the things that was most surprising to us as we wrote this book was how many adult men were asking for a book like this. Because how many men had grown up as the little boys, not hearing this message of how much they were worth. They had been abused, they had been neglected, they had not been given these empowering messages. And so that was one of the motivations for writing this book was not only for the little boys growing up, but for the little boys who had grown up and not heard this message.
So I think we're just going to open it up for Q&A. It's a small room, so if you just want to holler, we can probably do it. We have a 10-year-old son. He has to give a school presentation at the end of every week. And whenever he does, and his classmates are supposed to ask questions, And his classmates don't ask any questions. He goes, huh, I must have done a really good job. Everybody understood what I said. He's got great self-confidence. But we don't. So
is there any like go-to parenting, I don't know, not strategy, but like value or framework that you use to try to enforce what you communicated in this book to your children? Is there, I don't know, something like a rhythm that you have in your home or something you repeat to them often, or I don't know?
we're really trying to find rhythms in our home. Nailing it this year. I think the thing that shifted for me in how I communicate with the kids really was a shift I made in how I coached gymnastics when I started coaching. And it was a little easier in that context because you're only responsible for those children for like an hour out of the week. It's a little harder to be consistent with your own. But I really shifted what I praised and how I praised. So in gymnastics, and I think you see this just in daily life, you can have 12 girls on the team, and one of them is going to try for a month and she'll get her skill real fast. And her teammate is trying just as hard and it takes her 3 months to get that skill. And that can be really difficult. And and you see this in daily life. I've got one kid who really excels at math and another one who doesn't. And one who can try really hard at memory work, even harder than her sibling does. And one sibling gets it really well, the other sibling's got to put so much more effort into it. And so I shifted what I praised. So if one of my gymnasts had a success, say, I am so proud of your hard work that you put in this. You have excelled so well in being diligent. Look at your hard work paying off. And then for the gymnast who wasn't getting it, it's the same thing. I am so proud of you for getting back up and for trying again. That shows a lot of character. And so rejoicing at the success, but shaping my words to match the character, quality that was behind the success, the thing that they needed to take with them out of the gym. And we try to really do that with our kids too. And to teach them, my parents always told me, there's always going to be somebody who's worse than you, there's always going to be somebody who's better than you. So the question is, have you done your best? And can you rejoice with the person who's better than you, and can you help the person who needs your help? And so really just kind of trying to tune them in to those concepts.
And one of the struggles, of course, with being a parent of, I'll speak of our struggle with being a parent of a boy, is I grew up in a family of 13, and it was my parents of necessity were very task oriented with their raising of their children. And of course, that's something that I carry in. And with our son, he struggles with being able to focus. And so a lot of times it's, you have this idea in your head before you're a parent that, oh, I'm going to do things so much differently than my parents. It's going to be constant affirmation. If my son's not getting his work done, we'll sit down on the table, we'll have a heart-to-heart, and I'll be like, Jonathan, what's going on in your heart? Well, of course, you don't have all the time in the world, and then when the real world hits, it's, okay, do your work, okay, do your work. And so they can be hearing, oh, I just got to get, all my parents care about is the work. And there's some necessity in that raising of the parents, or raising kids, that you have to try to get them to do stuff. But I found that I don't always do it as well as I would like to. And so making sure that I'm always circling back after maybe we've had a hard day, going back and just affirming to him, sitting down and having maybe at the end of that day, having that affirming conversation, reaffirming the love that I have for him. And that the reason that I want our work to be done is so we can have time together, that sort of thing. Because you're never as good of a parent in real life as you are in your mind. And so having that humility and helping them realize that you're not perfect either. I found that to be very liberating, because you can carry a lot of guilt of the subliminal message you might be sending your children throughout the day. So learning to take that breath at the end of the day, recollect, and recenter around who they are and who you are.
Do you find it's helpful to share your failures with your children so that they can feel loved even through all of that, that you're like them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the strongest thing for my children realizing, that I'm on their side and exhibiting the kind of relationship that I want to have with them is not one of perfection, but it's one of repentance. So that when we do screw up, when we do, lose our temper, when they lose our temper, that you're modeling that model of repentance, because we're not Jesus, we're not perfect, and so the question is not what kind of perfect life are you going to exhibit for them, but what kind of life are you trying to model for them, so that you're acknowledging when I lost my temper today, or when I spoke unkindly, or when I was sharp, or when I didn't give you the attention I needed. It acknowledges to them that their feelings are legitimate, that their humanity, that you're respecting them. So absolutely, I think that I might not be the perfect parent, but my kids are going to grow up knowing I'm not perfect, but I want them to also hear that from me. Not just that they've grown up and figured it out on their own that I'm not perfect, but I'm going to tell them that I'm not perfect, and in a way that makes it so much easier to point to Christ. So.
And to have that conversation about, does that change your value? When you say, where does your value come from? Is this a works-based righteousness in your standing before God? Is it a works-based love in your standing before your parents? And to be able to know that my identity is in that, I have sinned, and this is where my identity comes from. It gives them a template to follow, and I do think it makes those concepts more relatable because they're fleshed out in front of them.
What was your writing process like? What was it like as a couple to write?
It was fun.
So believe it or not, it was actually, think of, well, we sat down and made coffee, and we sat around the table and we discussed these ideas. It was actually, she'd work on a bit and then she'd email it to me. We live in the same house, but we emailed it because what we'd have to do is tag team, because one of us would be watching the kids, making sure they weren't killing each other. And so it was very collaborative, and we would talk about it, and then we'd go back, one of us would go back and work on the draft. And it was honestly, there was, 90% of the words could come out, but it's like those last few 10% where you're arguing over the exact, little word at the end. Oh, this doesn't quite rhyme or that. So there was a lot of discussion back and forth. And then I think that the note to parents at the beginning actually took a lot of back and forth between the two of us. So that was when we finally decided we had to get a babysitter, and then we went out to a park, sat down at a picnic bench and said, okay, let's just figure this out.
So it was really fun, special to be able to do it together. But it was not the sitting down with a latte and the calm quiet of the evening with your children leaving you staying in bed process that would have been even more fun to do together. But being able to to talk to each other through this, like, what do we want our son to understand? To kind of go back and re-examining our own parenting and the messages that we heard growing up that shaped us into who we are. It just opened up a lot of really enjoyable communication.
How'd you work out the artwork in it?
That is the most fun process out of everything. We don't really do much of the artwork, but we love watching it come in. And so we were given kind of a slate of artists to choose from as we looked at the different styles, and we loved just the form of this particular artist, and also how near the artwork in the girls' book. But we just felt the expressions and the emotion that this artist was able to draw out was just beautiful. So we selected the artist from a group that Dale had looked at, and then we were sent a set of concept drawings. And that's just fascinating to me. My mind doesn't work like that. I'm the person that wants to be an artistic, musical individual, but I'm not at all. And so to get the concept drawings back was just fantastic to see what Tyndale had done looking at the text and then holding these concepts to life and just all of the little details. This is what I'm communicating with this piece, and this is what I'm communicating. It was so perfect, but I would never thought to do it that way. And so then Jacob and I would look at the concept drawings and it was, hey, we'd like it to be a little bit more, it was just a couple things we'd like to tweak if we can, and here's where we're thinking that would reflect the text better. I think we made a couple small adjustments to it, but it was, I mean, Tyndale's always done such a phenomenal job with both of the books and just drawing out the concepts and putting them in text. And then once the concept drawings are done, we get the color proofs and then put those and then they go.
I love the cover of it. I love the colors in it because when I see it, I think of little boys either in the backyard or camping, and to me, it's eye appealing. Eye appealing as an adult, it's got to be eye appealing even to a child. I mean, I happen to love books, but I looked at that cover as soon as I saw the cover. I went, "That's really lovely. Colors are beautiful."
I absolutely love.
I think that the contribution that I am most proud of is with the artwork. The style was beautiful, but when the early drafts came in, I noticed that it was a lot of children. And so one of the things that we really wanted to with this book is that this is a book that parents are going to be reading with their children. And I especially as a father wanted that pictures to reflect, strong parental relationships with the children. So strong, fathers being involved. And so, I think that you really nailed that aspect of it. Just showing parents delighting in their children. And I think that that's one of the things that observing sometimes the pop culture attitudes towards children is, that they're such a drag. Oftentimes they're very inconvenient, and they keep us from doing things that we love and all this sort of thing. And of course, there's elements of truth to that, but I think that the one thing that I wasn't expecting even as a parent myself is just how much you can enjoy and delight in the little persons that are running around your house. We just really wanted that to be reflected in these books.
What was your favorite part about writing children's books in general? So this one is how much the little girl work.
I think for me, it was being able to give this message in a way that's beautiful to all generations. Writing a memoir was really difficult. That was not a fun process. But writing a children's book, and just to have the images of the little girls that I wanted to read that book, the little boys I wanted to read that book, but also working so closely on such a frequent basis with the adults and writing for the little girls that never got to read a book like this and little boys that never got to read a book like this. The girls' book actually came out of an event that I did with the Sister Survivors. We did a big photo shoot for Glamour Women of the Year. And my 2-year-old at the time, almost 3, was having a really difficult time being away because we had been in court so much. So I took her with me to the photo shoot. This little frilly dress that she loves to spinach, got her little hair in pigtails. And then they were positioning us for the photo shoot. She looks at this room just full of women. She's, who are they, Mommy? So these are the women that helped stop that bad man who was hurting children. She puts her hand down on her shoulder. She thinks for a minute, she looks up again, she goes, why is that woman holding a picture of a little girl? And she pointed to the mother of Chelsea. Chelsea had committed suicide after being abused by Larry, so her mom was there holding the picture. And said, well, Chelsea can't be with us today, but she told the truth. And her mom is here so that we remember Chelsea. She puts her head down on my shoulder. She looks up again, she goes, why are there kids in there? She pointed to these little 13-year-olds in the front row. There are kids in here because even kids can tell the truth. Kids can stand for what's right, and kids can make change. And these kids help stop that bad man. She puts her head up on the shoulder again. She thinks for a minute. She lifts it up and she's, why are there so many that was just, I couldn't answer her after that. Because there were so many, because so many people hadn't done the right thing for so long. And there shouldn't have been so many. My 2-year-old was asking the questions that all the adults in charge should have been asking for the last 3 years. And there were also so many, because so many chose to do what was right. So many had found their identity and their value and had come out of the darkness. And I came home and I wrote how much is the little girl worth after that. You know, just getting to show those concepts when I had those faces in my mind all the time was really, really beautiful.
For those of us who didn't hear you when you were here before and wrote the first book, I'd like for all of us to hear a little bit more about your background and what you do.
So now I do full-time education and advocacy and crisis response. I'm licensed as an attorney. I have a background in legislative policy. And so I have the privilege of taking a very multifaceted response. I work with legislatures, I work with attorneys groups, I work with nonprofits and universities and school systems. Occasionally, if a group wants to do the right thing, they'll call me and ask what to do, and sometimes they'll actually do it. That doesn't happen very often, because they don't just want the answer they get. But being able to really look at what needs to change in our medical ethics, what needs to change in our legal structure, what needs to change in our education, in our policies, and our practices, and our corporate structure. And so that's what I do full-time now, in addition to homeschooling 4 kids.
And I just drive her around to make sure she gets paid for taxes.
I get lost with it.
Based on that work, what would you advise us as citizens and parents and grandparents to be advocating for in the schools and in organizations where we have influence?
Yeah. I'd say, and again, it's so multifaceted, but advocating for good policy, even just being able to go to your school and say, hey, what is our policy? Have you guys had a third party come in and do an audit of our culture and our corporate structure and our policies related to child protection? That's a really robust process that needs to happen. And so pushing for just some of that preventative work to be done. One of the things that I've been most intrigued by when I've been working in the university and school context is a growing willingness to talk about the impact of pornography on abuse and abusive dynamics. And I've found a lot more openness to that recently, which has been a very welcome shift. And so we've been doing a lot of discussion about what it means to divorce sexuality from personhood, the impact of what we see. And as much as that should not be an issue, the elementary school level statistics tell us that the average age of exposure is between 7 and 8 years old. And by the time kids are 11, over half of girls report being asked for photographs from their peers. And so it is something that our students are dealing with on a daily basis. And so for school systems to be aware of that and to be really educating their students, and I do think we need to be looking at our policies for cell phone usage and tablet usage. So many of our school systems are using smart technology, but that means that students have their phones with them all the time. So a lot of this is happening on the bus or it's happening in the lunchroom. And we don't necessarily automatically think of that as being connected to child abuse, but how we are giving access to our kids in a way that is shaping their mindset on sexuality is something that we've got to do a much better job on. And so even just opening those conversations with your school board, your church, saying what are our policies? Who are you getting good counsel from? Have you done this kind of audit? And ideally getting a group in there that can really help think through some of those things. A lot of churches have child protection policies now. They're very outdated because they haven't taken into account just the technology that we have now. We don't have policies on can your teacher text your student, and if not, why not? And so really looking at how we need to update existing policies. But somebody's got to start that process. Somebody's got to hold that level of accountability. And the other thing that is really impactful is just how we message and communicate. And that's something all of us have the power to do, whether it's on our social media platforms or in our physical communities, our religious communities. How you communicate on these issues is incredibly impactful because survivors are always watching and asking, am I safe? Is this the same person? So when you talk about abuse and abusive dynamics in a way that signals, I understand these dynamics, I understand trauma and trauma responses. I'm a safe person to talk to. That's your best bet at getting disclosure, which is also your best bet at finding a problem or somebody in your midst. Conversely, if you don't talk well about those things and open those doors for communication, survivors know, especially if they see you talk negatively about something that's happened related to abuse, that's what they would really think of me. If they don't understand the dynamics in this political context or this religious context that's hitting the news, they're not gonna understand the dynamics in my case either. So how we message and giving those opportunities to have those discussions is incredibly impactful.
The more you learn about abuse, I think the more you realize it's all around us. As a mother, what calms your fears for your children to visit?
Nothing, if you're locked in the room. I think for me, that's something I struggle with all the time, because the reality is you can do everything right, and your children still get abused. I almost wish I could look back on my child and say, oh, I wish my parents had just done this differently, because then I can't find anything, absolutely nothing I would have done differently if I were in my parents' shoes, but I wish they had done differently. They did everything right, and it still happened twice with two different perpetrators. But what I did have was a safe place to land. And I had healthy relationships, healthy masculinity, healthy sexuality modeled for me. That is an incredibly powerful tool. So much of the depth of the damage from the abuse is that you don't have a contrast between what is good and what is not good. Because the community response when you disclose is such a deep level of betrayal. Familial response when you disclose is often such a deep level of betrayal. And so we really focus on communicating with our kids, letting them know what proper boundaries should look like, not just sexual boundaries, but boundaries in general, concepts of bodily autonomy and personhood and respect, and that they will be defended, and that we care about what they're thinking and what they're feeling, and that we will believe them when they come to us, because that gives them the same place to land.
Yeah, there's been multiple studies demonstrating that the only significant difference between survivors who have positive healing experiences and those who continue to suffer long-term effects from their abuse is the only difference is how those people were treated and believed when they first disclosed. So just understanding that is a powerful impetus, but also it's encouraging to know that as much as abuse causes trauma that affects people, healing is also a possibility. And the community response and how you respond to someone who discloses abuse makes a world of difference, sometimes a life and death difference. And so just educating yourself and having the knowledge of how are you going to respond if you encounter a situation of abuse, it's so important. And we often have, even we do a lot of work in religious contexts, and we'll have pastors who think, well, I don't know anyone in my church, who suffered abuse. But then they will go and they will in a sermon or in a message, they will communicate, their heart for abuse victims, that they will communicate that they are safe, that they are a safe person, that they understand these dynamics. And every time they always come back to us and they go, I had no idea in my own church just how many people were suffering in silence. And so when you are able to demonstrate to people that you will believe them, that you will love them and support them, those people come to you. And so just that idea of believing and loving abuse victims, it's immensely powerful.
Jacob, what's something that you have learned in your role as a spouse of an abuse victim that you would want to share with other spouses?
I don't know that I'm able to quantify everything that I've learned. For some context, I grew up in a very, very conservative upbringing where, you know, women's issues and abuse, I knew it existed, but no one talked about it. You know, far more on our radar was, you know, loose women and, you know, purity culture and all those sorts of things. I think for me as a man coming from those circles, the biggest thing that I have learned is that men especially have a lot of power for good and for evil. Men and women can be victims of sexual abuse. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have experienced some form of sexual abuse in their lifetime or will. But perpetrators are almost exclusively men. Not to say that there are not women who are sexually abused, but the overwhelming majority of abusers are men. And sometimes people take that for you're suspecting men, and you know, not all men and all this sort of stuff. But realizing, you know, moving away from a position of defensiveness and saying, well, what do we do about this problem? What kind of man do I need to be to help with this problem? And ultimately for me, like when Rachel first disclosed when we were dating, I had no categories for trauma. I had no categories for abuse or how, you know, therapy or any of these sorts of things. The one thing that I had was a very strong conviction that Jesus Christ was the ultimate expression of authority and of power. And I remember sitting there on the swing set when she was disclosing, telling me about her abuse, and the shame that came over her. I could just see it was very evident, and she was expecting me to reject her. And realizing I don't have to be the macho man. I don't have to be, you know, I don't have to be the you know, the guy with the biggest muscles or the, you know, I had pretty big muscles. I didn't have to be that image of the worldly macho man. I needed to be the sort of person who would tell her, I will be there for you. I will listen to you. I will leave you. And I'm going to do whatever I can to show you a better example. So your body was violated. Someone took what was not theirs for their own pleasure. I'm going to flip that script on its head. And so by God's grace, just really having a tangible, something I could really understand what it meant to lay down my life for her. And one of the things that we often come across in, you know, counseling marriages and everything is the men especially are like, I'm not getting what I need out of this marriage. You know, my wife isn't able to give me what I need. And realizing that even in that area, that's something that men need to learn to be servants and to lay down their lives and to not say what do I need, but how can I serve? I mean, I really could, and I have thought about writing a book about what it looks like. And it has been such a privilege. I will say that it has been such a privilege to see God's redemption, how God has used horrible circumstances for His redemptive purposes. To see how through the pain that there really is redemption. Sorry, I'm rambling. That's why I should write a book instead of Q&As. his power through our weakness. I have seen so many men who are convinced of their importance to the kingdom of God because of their education, their silver tongues, and because they're men. And I have just seen how God uses a seemingly small woman speaking of her most vulnerable moments, and how God has just worked so powerfully in the lives of other people. I remember one specific incident. We were recording a podcast with a liberal Hollywood producer, and they were talking about God's justice. And Rachel was talking to this person about the reality of God's justice and hell. And I was thinking, if I was sitting there as a white bearded, seminary student, this producer, she wouldn't give me the time of day, and she would be reacting against me. She would say, well, but because of Rachel's experience, because of her fight for justice, that spoke so powerfully to this, as far liberal, as far unreligious person as you could possibly imagine. And the idea of justice, it clicked for them. The idea, she said, when speaking of hell and final judgment against sin, she said, wow, that's incredible. And so just realizing as a man, I'm in seminary, realizing as a man that I'm not the most important person on stage, and that God has the ability to do so much if we will only listen and give voice to those people. So I can keep talking about that.
On a purely practical level, something we found really helpful was just ensuring that we have very open communication in non-triggered moments. So sitting down and having, what are your triggers? When this happens, what's going to be helpful for you? For me to really think those dynamics through. Do I need you to leave? Do I need you to stay? How are we going to retrain the neurobiology? But to have those conversations in non-triggered moments so that you kind of have a game plan when necessary. And I know we're here for our book, but Jacob's, what you said about a man's perspective on sexuality, I would highly commend the book, The Great Sex Rescue by Sheila Gregory, because what it really does is it looks at what does Scripture say about sexuality and marriage, and holds up a healthy view of that. That's been really instrumental in a lot of the couples that we've had the chance to talk to, because it's helped them think through and combat what their understanding of sexuality is. What did God design it to be? And that's at the foundation of a lot of where the struggles arise in Christian marriages. That a lot of where we go wrong in our counseling when these couples come to pastors or come to biblical counselors asking for help, it's coming from a very warped perspective of sexuality. So the counseling we get is very damaging to that.
And one thing just with that, John, that I've often thought, some of the biggest harms I think that come about in marriages is people go into the marriage thinking, this is how women work, this is how men work. And you make some generalizations, but for me, realizing I'm not marrying women, right? I am marrying Rachael, who is a specific individual, who has a specific history, all these sorts of things that go into making her a unique individual. And so learning about her was the most important thing that I could do. And that included a lot of communication, asking her, hey, how does this work? Does this help you? Does this not help you? And realizing you're not marrying women, who's that book? Women Are From Venus. Yeah. So people think in these terms of generalities, and well, I'm doing what the book said, why won't my wife work? And it's because you shouldn't be reading a book, you should be reading your wife. And so that idea of communicating and talking and learning about each other, don't listen to what other people are saying. I mean,
Except Sheila, listen to Sheila.
Are you an attorney because of what you experienced and then where that led you down the path that you made the decision to become an attorney so that you could help others?
Not actually, no. I told my parents that I wanted to be an attorney when I was 10. I wrote my first contract when I was around 8. I was supposed to be doing my math homework and my mom was on the phone and I didn't think she should be. I thought it was very unjust that I had to do my homework when she wasn't calling. So I wrote the contract that I would do my math if she got off the phone and did X amount of hours with me and then I brought it to her to sign. I was kind of headed that direction really young. That being said, I'm very, very grateful for it. My motivation for becoming an attorney, when I said to my parents when I was 10, I want to be able to do something to protect kids. And I could see that the law just had a lot of impact on that. It shaped policy. A lot of attorneys are the ones who write legislation. You have constitutional freedom issues and prosecution. And so I wanted to be able to do something to protect kids. But I'm very grateful. So it wasn't because of Larry, it wasn't because of my views, but I'm very grateful that I had that background. I can't imagine navigating the justice system not having been an attorney and just going into it blind. I'm so grateful that I had that background.
You said something that I think is impactful, and maybe coming from a woman, maybe I'm not really the one to say it, but I was reading not long ago, and he was a pastor, and I don't even remember his name, but he talked about how much things would work better in marriages if men would listen, just flat out listen. And I remember pausing, reading this couple little sentences, and I stopped and pondered it. And you said the same thing. And it is not a subject that is expounded on very often. Really, we still, and I'm a minister, and we still deal today with, you are the woman, shut up and be quiet. And so we like to say, no, that doesn't happen. This isn't stuff that goes on, but it does. And it goes on in ministry, and it goes on in the dark places, in the secret places. And if you're a minister, you're dealing with congregations, you're dealing with people that are struggling. To me, it's an impactful statement. And I wonder how many actually, and I don't mean in this room, but people actually think about that. We need to have a voice. I don't think it's just women. I think people in general, we need to have a voice, and not crazy screaming nutcases, but we need to have a voice. And I think that's powerful.
And I think how we define listening is really key. My parents would tell you that the propensity for advocacy was evident early on. It means I was stubborn and argumentative when I was a kid, just when I was a kid. But my mom would always ask me, why are you arguing with me right now? I need you to listen to me. And then she would say, are you listening to me because you're formulating the rebuttal in your head? Or are you listening because you're actually considering what I'm saying? 9 times out of 10, because I was forming the rebuttal in my head. I was not actually listening to her. I was going through the motions of listening. And so even just defining what listening means and the importance of a humble heart, that you're listening to learn. You're not listening because you're trying to tear someone down. You're not listening so that you can form the rebuttal. You're listening to actually hear and learn, because you might actually be wrong.
So what did you do? Excuse me. What did you do to train yourself in that area?
I mean, my mom kept saying, are you listening to me because you're forming a rebuttal, or are you listening to me because you're actually listening to me? She just kept bringing that up to me all of the time. And I had to be receptive to that. Sometimes I wasn't, sometimes I wasn't. But that continual accountability and somebody just reframing that for me was so, so important, because I do have that natural tendency, and also asking, are you arguing with me because you just want to win? You just want to be right, you want to win? Or are you arguing with me because you actually believe this is the right thing, and that bad things will happen if you don't do it your way? And so having somebody to ask those penetrating questions to make me think through what my motives were, why I was doing what I was doing, and if I was actually approaching this with a humble heart, or if I was secretly approaching it very arrogantly, forming that rebuttal in my head while I was listening, that was really, really important for me.
That's very good. Thank you.
But I'm not stubborn anymore.
I would say that you never win an argument with your wife. You never win an argument
Has it been difficult to find a safe and healthy community, especially for your children?
Yes.
Yes, well, safe, I think, is a relative term. You know, the healthy aspect has been something that we've been really struggling with. And in terms of people who are aware of these dynamics, you know, we're quite conservative theologically, and theological conservatives have not been the greatest at dealing with these issues.
At what?
And so there's a real tension there, convictionally, of how do you navigate these areas, and especially even for myself, as I think, where are the healthiest areas for me to be exposing my wife to, forcing her to be picking battles that she might not otherwise be exposed to. So yeah, it is a struggle. I will say that we have found our church does a phenomenal job of caring for us, and our pastors are just amazing. But sometimes just even being in what's the word I'm looking for, a culture, what people are, would be talking about and praising, oh, such and such is my favorite pastor. You know in the back of your head, well, he's been covering up abuse in his church for decades. And well, I know what he says to women in closed doors in the counseling sessions. And so there is a real struggle with that. And I don't know that we have necessarily landed in we're at a perfect equilibrium, we're great. And I think some of that's just the tension of living in a fallen world. I do think that there are some significant changes that need to happen. And it's hard because sometimes you say, there's changes, but I'm too tired to be the one to keep pushing for them. Or it's not safe for us to be the one pushing for them. Yeah. And that gets back to the listening aspect. So.
I'm much more inclined to take it all on, he's much more inclined to be like, oh, you need to stop.
But no, I'm not telling her to stop, I just don't want her to burn herself out.
I think it's been a good reminder for me as painful as it is, finding safe community is hard. We occupy a very unique place in conservative theology, and we are very polarizing figures in conservative circles. We just are. And so there's not often the ability to answer the question honestly, how was your week? Because if you answer, how was your week, you're going to touch on their favorite theologies that they hold very dear. I just haven't seen the other side of a lot of them. And so we do often feel like we don't have a home or a community so much anymore. And oftentimes that community doesn't necessarily want us, depending on what circle you're looking at. I do think there is a shift happening, and I've been really encouraged to see it. There's definitely a growing awareness of these issues in ways that I didn't see even 2 or 3 years ago. And so I'm very encouraged by that. We've got a long way to go. But it also has been a really good reminder to both of us as a community. Scripture says you're strangers in a foreign land. And I feel like I understand that better now because the groups that I thought were my same community really weren't, and still aren't. And so I feel like I understand that better, that it makes me long more for heaven, when God's glory is completely revealed, and you are living in unity around holiness and not unity around covering things up. And even just remembering, I love Hebrews, where it's Hebrews 11, and where it gets to Abraham, and it talks about how Abraham has gone out from his land and says, if he had looked back, he would have been given the opportunity to return. And just kind of doing a heart check, is do I really want to return? to the land that I was in before. And be willing to press on and hold to God's promises, even though we are strangers before.
Okay, so since there's not any last minute questions, but
Just, this is the $1 million question that I've been dying to ask you for years, but you forgave your abuser. That's a tough one, because I working with abused women and whatnot is, how do you forgive an abuser that is not repentant? Or how, was it more for your sake, or, I don't know.
So theologically, I don't think I did forgive Larry. I extended forgiveness, and I know that kind of sounds like splitting hairs, but I do think it's a really important distinction. When I spoke to Larry in the courtroom, I said, I extend that to you. I don't think he's accepted it. He doesn't want it. I think he did anything wrong. But I think we get forgiveness wrong theologically a lot of times, and we teach it as if it is dichotomous to justice. And when you teach it that way, you create a model of forgiveness that minimizes and obfuscates the incredible evil that's been done. And that's part of why, as I was really wrestling through, I didn't want to forgive Larry. And as I was really thinking through as a teen, like, why do I not want to do this? What's going on if I don't want to do it? And I realized it was because I knew if I said I forgive you, that the Christian church would want to tie that up in a sparkly package and a little bow and say, look at this is so beautiful what God's done. And it would be a way to minimize what happened. Because it's so much nicer if you just tie that with a bow. I wasn't actually afraid of forgiving for forgiving. I was afraid of how forgiveness would be weaponized. And that's exactly what the evangelical church did. Even when I extended it to Larry in my impact statement, every single evangelical outlet that talked about my impact statement, they skipped right to the forgiveness part. Some of them even clipped the impact statement and cut it and time-stamped it at the forgiveness section and bypassed the 15 minutes of discussion about God's wrath and justice that was the foundation for forgiveness. I think if we properly understand forgiveness, it's beautiful. But in Christian faith, forgiveness is rooted in God's justice. The reason I can forgive Larry is not because God has said it is mine and it's not a big deal. It is mine and I will repay. So my ability to extend forgiveness to Larry is rooted in a perfect Redeemer who is going to bring justice on my behalf. And I never heard the cross preached that way.
That's good.
I actually found a lot of comfort in African American theology because their theology of suffering and justice is so rich because of what we've been through generationally. I never heard the cross preached as a witness to the evil done to me. I heard it preached as beautiful for my salvation, and it was and it is. But I also realize now that when I look at the cross, that's a picture of how much what was done to me matters to God. And that in the Christian faith, justice is always done. Either it falls on the abuser, or it falls on the Savior who stands in his place. But forgiveness is never achieved by minimizing, by outweighing, as if Larry saying the right words could wipe away what happened and wipe away the damage. When you understand what the cross really means, it paints an incredible picture of how much God cares for those who have been wounded and how much what was done to him matters to him. But I didn't hear it preached that way. I kind of had to wrestle through it myself. And I'd like to see us do a much better job teaching what forgiveness really means and treating justice like it's a biblical pursuit. That it's something that matters, that God prioritizes, and that it's doing God's work to pursue justice. We need to teach them as dependent on each other because they are, not dichotomous with each other.
I just want to say, I think it's excellent what you brought to the forefront. You seldom hear anyone talk about it in the manner in which you just did. Have you ever considered writing a book, even a small one, and putting some of this on paper and in words for people to read? It's very, very powerful, Rachel. It's very powerful.
I have, most conservative circles don't want to read from a woman. That's part of the difficulty. I appreciate that. I have had the opportunity, I actually went with our Veritas Forum the year after my impact statement and was able to go around to one of the Ivy League schools and we discussed philosophical intermediate of justice and forgiveness and how the Christian framework is the only framework theologically that doesn't create a model where forgiveness is predicated on outweigh the bad that we've done. Every other theological model out there is a works-based foundation, so forgiveness is obtained by doing enough other good things that outweighs the bad that you've done, so that thing doesn't matter that much anymore. And so I really enjoyed being able to delve into that and to kind of raise some of that with pastors. But I do think it is so beautiful when you understand it. Because the survivors are always asked this, does this matter? Does God care? And they intrinsically feel the depth of the damage, but they're left with a God who looks like he doesn't care much at all because of the way our theology is taught. And so I would love to see us be able to handle that so much more richly. When I'm working one-on-one with survivors, I usually start with the book of Revelation. And I bring them to that picture of Christ coming back on a white horse with a robe dipped in blood, bearing the sword of justice. And this is how much he cares for you, his daughter, his son. This is how much what was done to you matters to him. He is coming back for you. Because we've got to make that picture. And if we don't, we're not doing justice to the character of God. We're misrepresenting the work of the Trinity, we're misrepresenting the gospel, we're misrepresenting the very character and nature of God himself. We have to take that very seriously.
And I know I'm a poor substitute for Rachel, but this is basically what I'm writing my dissertation on. So we talked a lot about this sort of dynamic, and so maybe we'll write a book together after that's done, if it's ever done.
By email.
Exactly.